So, what do you think of that, folks? How about that? So in Zimbabwe, here we have a new bill that has just been introduced. It's going to go to the Senate. It's been approved by the lower house of parliament in Zimbabwe. It's going to go to the Senate. It's probably going to get approval in the Senate. And then it's going to be signed off by Zimbabwe's current president, our mate Emerson. This bill is going to do a number of things. It's going to extend presidential terms from 5 years to 7 years. It's also going to scrap direct presidential elections, which means from this point forward in Zimbabwe, you will only be able to get a new president if Parliament is consulted. Parliament is the only entity that is allowed to open the door up to a new president for him to walk, or her, equality folks, for him or her to walk in as president of the country. That is only going to be decided by Parliament in Zimbabwe because direct presidential elections are going to be scrapped thanks to this new bill. And of course, folks, this new bill, which extends presidents' terms from 5 to 7 years and scraps direct presidential elections, whereby only Parliament can elect the new president. This bill, did it go to a national referendum whereby the people were allowed to voice their approval or disapproval of this bill? No, it didn't. The bill was also passed, you guessed it, by Parliament, who also coincidentally happens to have their parliamentary term extended by an extra 2 years as well. Coincidence. So that's the new bill, folks, in Zimbabwe. No more direct presidential elections. The president can only be elected by Parliament. The president's term will now move from 5 to 7 years. And even though in 2013, folks, as we read in the article, in 2013, a new constitution was brought into Zimbabwe. And the new constitution said that a presidential term could only be extended if the legislation in question was put to a national referendum, and the voters were given a chance to approve or disapprove of the bill. That's what the Constitution said back in 2013. But what did the Constitutional Court in Zimbabwe say last Wednesday? No, we're not going to listen to that anymore. And they rejected any legal action, any legal appeal against the bill. They just said, no, even though our Constitution said that we had to put this kind of a bill to a national referendum for the voters, even though that's what the Constitution said in 2013, no, we're gonna change our minds. The Constitutional Court has decided to change its mind and say, you know what? Nah, we're just gonna allow Parliament to pass the bill. And we're just gonna allow Parliament to choose the new president. And we're just going to allow Parliament to extend the term of the new president from 5 to 7 years. And our mate Emerson, the current president of Zimbabwe, who should have been booted out by 2028, he now gets to stay until 2030. I think this is a wonderful bill, folks. You know, I said it at the start of the show, a marvellous bill. I think it's great. Let me tell you why I think this bill is great. Because it just highlights, folks, it just highlights exactly what democracy is used for. What is democracy used for? Is it used to help the people in a country? Is that what democracy is all about? Is it all about, this system of democracy, the democratic system, democratic values? Is it all about helping the people? Or is it a way to give people the illusion that they are being served while other people benefit in some way by the common person being distracted and operating under a fuck ton of distortion, thinking that they are being served when in reality they aren't really. What is the purpose of democracy? We can only speculate, folks. Is it really to serve the people, or is this whole concept of democracy one big deceptive strategy to get people to buy into a bogus version of reality that actually doesn't exist? Zimbabwe is a great case study, folks. Because what does Zimbabwe teach us about democracy? What does it teach us? Well, I often hear people say, the Constitution. The Constitution. Now look, are some constitutions more robust than others? Yes, I'm sure they are. But folks, what is a constitution? What fundamentally is a constitution? Is it a physical structure? Is it a physical entity? Or is it just words on a piece of paper? Think about it. What is a constitution? A constitution really is nothing other than a whole bunch of laws and legislation that dictate how a particular plot of land that we call a country is going to behave. That's what a constitution is. It's a bunch of laws and a bunch of legislation. What is a law? What is legislation? Work your way back up the chain. Laws and legislation are nothing other than a bunch of schmucks in suits and ties in a room writing words on a piece of paper. That's what a law is. That's what legislation is. And if laws and legislation make up a constitution, then that's what a constitution is. And what are we seeing here in Zimbabwe? Well, you know, what we're seeing in Zimbabwe, folks, is honesty. This is why I support the bill. We are at least seeing honesty, at last, in Zimbabwe. You know, when Emerson, the current president, came into power in 2017, whenever he booted Mugabe out, you know, when he came in, he said that he was going to bring a new age of economic growth, prosperity, and he was going to introduce, you know, brand new democratic values into Zimbabwe. All right. So he told us that he was going to bring in democracy. Well, it looks like our mate Emerson has just thought, fuck that, I couldn't be arsed with giving the illusion of democracy anymore. We're just going to do what we really wanted to do, which is extend my term as president until 2030, extend Parliament's term until 2030, scrap direct presidential elections, and fuck the idea of a national referendum to pass bills. Just let Parliament do that too. You see, what has happened is Zimbabwe has decided to just be honest with us all. And I appreciate that. You know, I appreciate a bit of honesty here and there. You know why I appreciate what Zimbabwe is doing? Is because at least you know what Zimbabwe is. They're telling you. They are literally telling you. Not in their words, but in their actions. Great. Because at least I know where I stand now. If I decide to go to Zimbabwe and build a house out in Zimbabwe, at least I know I don't get to vote in a presidential election. At least they've just said to me, no, Mr. Bandido, the Parliament chooses the president, not you. No, Mr. Bandido. You don't get a say in what bills get passed because the Constitutional Court here can just reject any legal action that you want to take, any appeal. No, you as a voter, that's a waste of time, Mr. Bandido. And I appreciate that because isn't it great, folks, when you just know where you stand in life? You know, we could broadly apply this to life. If I'm dealing with someone who I think is my friend, you know, is there anything worse than thinking someone is your friend and then you later find out that they've been screwing you over? I mean, there may be people in this life that you and I dislike because our worldviews are at odds with one another. But at least you know what they stand for. You may not agree with those people. You may actually dislike them. You may not think they are admirable people for reason X, Y, or Z, but at least you know where they stand. There's a sort of honesty in how they are presenting their agenda in life. You may not agree with the agenda, but at least there's an honesty, there's a sincerity in how they are presenting their agenda. They're not having you under any false illusions about who they are or what they stand for. So, if I have to be honest, folks, I would unquestionably rather be doing business with people who I disagree with on certain points, but at least I know who they are, than some rat who is giving me the illusion, who is masquerading as one person, but actually whenever I turn my back, he fucking picks his shiny dagger out of his pocket and he's ready to stick it where the sun doesn't shine. I would much rather be dealing with people with whom I disagree on certain things, but I know where they stand, instead of dealing with rats. Instead of dealing with people who are trying to deceive me into believing a version of who they are. So, I like that Zimbabwe has just decided to take the mask off to, get rid of this sheen, this veneer, this illusion of them being something that they aren't. Emerson came in 2017. He said he was going to do X, Y, and Z. And now he's just decided, fuck that. Couldn't be arsed with that. I am benefiting too much from my current position of power at the top of this political dominance hierarchy. I want to stay here for a few more years. Can we pass a bill, folks? Oh, but Mr. Emerson, President Emerson, the Constitution in 2013 says that such a bill would have to go to a national referendum, and the voters would have to be given a shot. I don't want to hear about the voters. Just pass the bill, please. Honesty. Emerson is being honest. His parliament, his administration is being honest. They're just telling us what you get when you go to Zimbabwe. Regardless of whether I agree or disagree with what they are doing, the broader point here is the honesty with which they are now portraying their country. It doesn't matter whether I agree or disagree. At least I know what I'm looking at. When I look at Zimbabwe, I can now look and say, all right, I'm now an informed traveller. If I want to go and build my house somewhere in the world, at least I now know that if I go to Zimbabwe anytime soon, I'm not going to be able to vote in a direct presidential election. I really won't have much of a say in any important bills that are going to get passed. There aren't going to be very many national referendums to get my input. And also, the sitting president is going to get 7 years instead of 5. So if I really dislike the sitting president, that's tough. 7 years. At least I know. So now I am an informed traveller, an informed consumer. If I want to go to Zimbabwe and do stuff, I'm informed. I know what I'm looking at, in other words. Which, folks, brings us on to just this broad lesson that we can extract. You want to know, folks, what you're looking at in this life. The last thing you want is to be deceived into believing that the facts of reality are actually this, when in reality they're actually more like this. We want to make sure at all times that we're actually seeing the world clearly. Now, Zimbabwe has a constitution. So now I'm going to use my logic, folks. I like to use my own logic. You may agree or disagree with my logic, but it's my logic. Zimbabwe has a constitution. The United States has a constitution. The UK has a constitution. Every country has some form of what we're going to call a constitution. what is a constitution, folks? It's just a bunch of laws, regulations, and legislation that instructs how the people on that plot of land are going to behave. It establishes the framework within which people, citizens of that country, are going to behave. It lets us know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. It lets us know how this country functions, or is supposed to function. That's what a constitution is. All right. So if Zimbabwe has a constitution, and Zimbabwe can just decide to change its constitution because it feels like it, without the input of the citizens and the voters. If Zimbabwe is able to do this, if Zimbabwe's constitutional court is able to reject everybody else's appeal, the people who disagree with this bill, if Zimbabwe's constitutional court, which is supposed to represent the Constitution, decides, no, we are going to reject all appeals, and this bill is going to go ahead anyway. If Zimbabwe can do that, then logic would tell you that if it can happen in Zimbabwe, it can happen anywhere else. Would logic not lead you to that conclusion? Now, as I said earlier, some constitutions have more checks and balances than others. Some constitutions are more robust than others. But in theory, folks, if a constitution is nothing other than a bunch of laws and legislation, and when we realize what laws and legislation are, they are nothing other than words on a piece of paper that are enforced by a military, may I add. You know the way it said there that old Emerson, in order to knock old Mugabe off the top spot of president, he had to have military backing? Do you remember we said that in the article? The article said that, folks? Well, you know, a constitution is nothing other than laws and legislation. Laws and legislation are nothing other than words on a piece of paper. How is it that words on a piece of paper are so powerful? Because words on a piece of paper don't change the world, folks. Words on a piece of paper the words can't leap off the piece of paper and start acting of their own free will. No, it's just they are words on a piece of paper. So why do these pieces of paper with words on them that we call laws and legislation, why do they have so much sway and influence and power? Because they are backed up by force. And that force normally comes from the military. So, if Zimbabwe can change its constitution, in other words, if Zimbabwe can change its laws and legislation, because Zimbabwe has control of the military, then in theory, any other government that has a constitution which controls the military will also have the potential to change its constitution. Because when all is said and done, folks, the people of Zimbabwe may disagree with this new bill. But let's think of this logically. What can they do? What can they do? The Constitutional Court is blocking their appeal to challenge the bill. So legally, they can't do anything. So, you know, the first port of call, the first and only port of call would be, okay, well, launch an appeal. You know, try to do this legally. Well, the Constitutional Court has just said, nah, you can't do that. So, what can the people of Zimbabwe do? Well, they could get their rifles and their pitchforks and their machetes, and they could say, all right, well, if you're not going to allow us to legally challenge this thing that we disagree with, then we're going to physically challenge you. All right, so that means then that the people of Zimbabwe need to fight the military of Zimbabwe. How do you think that's going to go down, folks? So it's the military of Zimbabwe against the people with their rifles, pitchforks, and machetes. And their sandals. Don't forget about their sandals either. You know, at the end of the day, folks, laws, legislation, and a constitution only has validity because it's enforced. And because there's a threat of violence, should one try to upend the constitution, should one try to not operate within the framework of the constitution. So, you know, who ultimately has the power here? Is it really the people of Zimbabwe? Is it really the people of any country? You know, a constitution, if we look at Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe shows us that a constitution can be changed if certain people want to change it. And if you don't have the ability to either legally challenge them or physically challenge them, then it doesn't matter a fuck whatever you think. Because unless you have a private military and you can actually threaten the people who enforce the current constitution, what can you do? And as we've already discussed, the Constitutional Court in Zimbabwe told everyone to piss off who doesn't like the bill. So, what's the lesson here, folks? Well, you know, people love to ramble on about democratic values and democracy and the Constitution. And you know what I think of all of this stuff? I think that it means diddly squat, to be quite honest with you. The Constitution is going to reflect the agenda of the people in charge, and it's going to reflect the agenda of the people who are able to enforce it. I don't find myself in those circumstances. I ain't in a position to legally challenge anyone or to physically challenge anyone. So, as a result, when we think of this idea of democracy, is it really democracy? Are the people really being served? Are the people really the ones that have the authority and the power to enact change in their country, also known as a plot of land on earth with a little border around it? Is it really the people who have the ability to change the legislation, to have a say in the approval or disapproval of bills? You know, here's the thing. At least Zimbabwe is showing you what it really is, what it really stands for. And I can at least appreciate that. I may disagree with it, but at least there's an honesty to it. They are telling me point blank who they are and what they stand for. But you know what is more insidious, folks? Do you know what is considerably more insidious? I go back to my earlier example of the friend who's pretending to be your friend, but they're actually stabbing you in the back. You would be much better to ally with someone who you disagree on a whole bunch of shit, but at least you know where they stand. At least there's an honesty to their position. Instead of getting engaged with some sort of a little fucking scrawny, deceptive, throw you under the bus type of character rat who will say one thing to your face and then do something else behind your back. Zimbabwe is not pretending to be democratic anymore. There are other places on earth that will sell you hard on the notion of democracy. They will sell you hard on it. They will tell you that democracy is extremely important and that we need to uphold the democratic values of this nation in question, whatever nation or country it may be. And you know, folks, you see, whenever I see someone, I'm just talking from my own perspective. This is just the Bandido's own perspective. You see, whenever I see someone lead their argument with the conservation of democracy, I am instantaneously suspicious of said individual. So that's just a filter that I use in life, folks. Because here we have President Emerson in Zimbabwe. In 2017, President Emerson said that he was going to bring in a new age of democracy and economic growth. Here we are 8 years later, and not only is he no longer the constitutionalist that he said he was, and not only is he not going to respect the term time that he said he was going to respect, the presidential term time of 5 years, he's not even trying to conceal it. He's not even trying to be slimy or slippery or deceptive outright. In other words, he's not leading anymore with democracy. But back then he did. Back then he did lead with democracy. And we can now see 8 years later what it looks like. My experience tells me, folks, it's only my experience. I'm only one man. And I have my own worldview, and my own worldview will have its own distortion in it. I'm not perfect. I don't see the world perfectly. But my experience tells me that when someone leads an argument with the preservation of democracy and democratic values, I am instantaneously suspicious of this person. They have already acquired my suspicion. Because I have seen in my own life far too many times, I have acquired far too much evidence from the political marketplace of politicians telling me that they stand for democracy, only for me to be presented with evidence subsequently, years later, that they were talking out of an orifice that wasn't their mouth. You know the way we've got different openings in our body, folks. You've got your ears, you've got your nose, you've got your mouth, and you've got other openings as well. Well, it turns out that in my experience, most people, whether it's politicians, fucking celebrities, or some other schmuck online or in the real world, any person that tells me that the conservation of democracy is extremely important immediately has my suspicion. Because my experience tells me that democracy is used as a tool of deception. It is used to distract people and deceive them. It is used to give people the illusion that the world works one way when in fact it works a completely different way. And so long as people are distorted in this notion of democracy, they can continue to be exploited while the exploiters continue to benefit from all the riches that come from people being exploited. They get to benefit from the exploited people. And it's beautiful because as long as the people don't realize they're being exploited, it's just a marvelous existence for the exploiters. If there's such a word, those who exploit. And that's for me, folks. Democracy doesn't mean jack shit to me. I know what the dictionary definition of it is. Democracy is a system of governance that serves the people, and the people decide what is going to be passed in government, and the people have the ability to influence what the leaders are going to pass in Parliament and in government. And the people have the opportunity to vote in who they want to. I know there's a dictionary definition of democracy. I understand that. But it has precisely zero significance in my existence. I almost consider it not a word in many ways. And for me, the dictionary definition of democracy is simply used as a tool of deception. It's there to give people the illusion that they have input in a society when they really don't. In other words, it's used to appease people. It's used to keep people happy, to keep people comfortable in the notion that, they actually have a say in the world. And more importantly still, it has people fucking distracted. It has people pooling their time, energy, and attention in a way that is not advantageous for their own existence. Folks, this is why I talk on the show all the time about being a selfish git. That's why I always talk about being selfish. Is there any other way to be in this life other than being selfish? Because, we have a good old phrase in the English language. You should never put the cart before the horse. Never should you put the cart before the horse. And you see, if you don't have your own house in order, if your own life isn't in or on the way towards optimal circumstances, if you're not seeing the world clearly, how the fuck are you going to help anyone? You can't even help yourself. And this idea of democracy, it literally distracts people. It distracts people from who? Who does it distract people from? It distracts them from themselves. People are so busy fucking paying attention to some schmuck prime minister, to some schmuck president, to some voting system, to some framework of politics, to some democratic framework. They are literally forgetting about their own existence. They are so hell-bent on what's happening over here and who are we going to vote in and the local election, and when all of it is literally an illusion. Folks, the Constitution can be fucking changed if someone wants to change it. Laws can be introduced, legislation can be introduced if someone in power who has the ability to enforce the implementation of these laws and legislation, they can be introduced. They can be injected into the Constitution, and the Constitution, guess what, can be amended. Because if you have the force to do so, if you have the military backing to do so, who the fuck's gonna stop you? Really? Now, I know what you may say. You may say, well, the world just can't go totally totalitarian. Otherwise, the whole society will collapse. That's correct. That's why we have this word democracy. Democracy is there to just keep people in line. It's there to keep people happy. In many ways, folks, it's there because there will be people who just need to believe in it. It's a coping mechanism, we could say. Some people may sniff that it's a load of bollocks, but people just don't want to look at the unfiltered reality. And so they grasp tightly this notion of democracy, and they delude themselves into believing that democracy can be saved, it can be salvaged, it can be fucking reinvented, it can be reestablished, Fine. If your psychology is such that you just need to cling to the notion of democracy, that's fine. You do that. But for me, I ain't going to be getting bogged down in democracy. I'm not going to be getting bogged down in trying to save democracy, in trying to restore democratic values. They've never been there. Like, folks, to restore something, it had to have been there in the first place. It's never been there. It's an illusion. And some people want to believe in the illusion. And I would argue that some people have to believe in it because they can't live their own lives otherwise. They have to live their life thinking that they have input into important matters. Otherwise, they become dysfunctional. And that's fine. Those people are just going to be on the rat wheel. There's no other place for them. Rat wheel with a wee fucking block of cheese in their cage. Once they get off the rat wheel, they're going to eat a wee bit of cheese. Very stereotypical example, isn't it? Rat and cheese, folks. I thought I'd just bring out the stereotypes today. But here you are on your rat wheel with a bit of cheese in your cage. Some people just have to live their lives like that. That's fine. But there will be other people who will actually see democracy for what it is. They'll see it as a tool of deception. They'll see it as this thing that's used to give the illusion of authority to the people. that's used to give the illusion that the people actually have a say in important things. There will be people who see that. So those are the people that I am speaking to here, not the people that want to cling to it. And you know, for those of you who can see what a constitution is, what a law is, what legislation is, how a law and legislation actually acquires potency, i.e. through being enforced by the military, once you understand that people at the top of political dominance hierarchies are up there because it is very advantageous for them to be up there, it is within their best interests to be at the top of a political dominance hierarchy, like our mate, President Emerson, out in Zimbabwe, you get access to a whole bunch of resources up there, and your life becomes, you know, many orders of magnitude more luxurious and fantastic. You get access to information before other people get access to information. You just also happen to know what's going to happen in the markets, any big events that are going to take place, like, you know, a big significant financial crisis, maybe a wee old pandemic here and there, maybe, you know, another war. You know, when you're up there at the top of a political dominance hierarchy, you get access to information that common average Joe doesn't get access to. In other words, at the top of a political dominance hierarchy, folks, as we've talked about before, you get access not only to very valuable resources, but you also get access to very valuable information before everybody else gets access to said resources and information. So, it is not within the best interests of the current crop of politicians in democratic societies to have the system be set up any differently. They are benefiting. That's fine. I actually fundamentally don't have a problem with that. It is what it is. It's the way the world is set up. But what I don't want to do, here's what I don't want to do. Politicians are going to do what they're going to do. We talked about this on a recent YouTube show with Nicola Sturgeon, and we talk about it all the time. Politicians are going to do what they're going to do. They are one big whopping uncontrollable. You can't do anything about them. You can't change their minds. You can't alter their decision making. But here's what you wouldn't want to do, folks. If you are someone who looks at democracy with a skeptical lens, you know, if you are someone who has seen through your own past history here on planet Earth, if you are someone who has seen public figures, celebrities, political figures, rich, wealthy people use democracy as a way to get into positions of power so that they can wield power and benefit from the resources that come with said position of power, and then do a 180 on what it was they were telling you 6 months, 2 years, 4 years ago, if you are one of those people who have observed people using this notion of democracy and then fucking doing a U-turn on it once they have got access to the position of power and the resources that they need to get access to. In other words, once you realize that democracy is used as a tool of deception so that people can climb dominance hierarchies and benefit themselves, why are they climbing the political dominance hierarchy, folks? Is it to better your family's existence? And to better your existence? Fuck no. They're climbing those political dominance hierarchies to benefit themselves. Fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if you are one of those people who isn't clinging to the idea of democracy, you see it for what it is, and you're now thinking, well, what next? You know, it's one big fucking scam, you could say. It's a way for people to scam other people. It's a way for people to exploit other people. Democracy! Cast your vote! You know, the people have the power. You know, if you realize it's a scam, effectively, and you're thinking, well, what do I do now? Well, let me tell you what I do. I can't tell you what you ought to do, but let me tell you what I do. I stop pooling time, energy, and attention into the political process. That's what I do. I stop doing it. Folks, I have never voted in my life. Ever. Believe it or not, even the young Bandido haven't voted. Why? Because I don't care. I don't care, fundamentally. Oh, but your ancestors, they fought and died for you to have the right to vote. It is a scam. That is rhetoric that comes from a scammer or a dipshit. Even if my ancestors did fight, it doesn't matter. If the whole thing is a scam, what am I supposed to do? Just engage and get scammed anyway because some fucking ancestor of mine who I don't know decided to go out onto the battlefield and get his bollocks blown off? Am I supposed to just get scammed in his name? Am I supposed to just, fuck me, string myself up by my underwear and be a piñata for other people? Am I supposed to just string myself up on a tree and have my pockets emptied and my wallet stolen because my ancestors went out on the battlefield? Is that what you're telling me? That is the exact thing I don't want to do. Oh, democracy, your ancestors fought for it. Good for them. I'm happy that they used their time, energy, and attention in a way that they were happy with. Good on them. Well, I'm not my ancestors. I'm the Bandido. And I have my own life to live. And you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to start dedicating precious time and energy into something that isn't going to yield any significant results. What is my vote doing? What am I accomplishing by engaging with politics and the democratic process? What am I getting out of this? Well, my experience tells me that I get sweet fuck all out of it. That's why I don't bother engaging with it. If other people want to cling to democracy and cast their vote in the local election and go out and vote in the national referendum and champion the idea of democracy, how about it? You must think that's a worthy use of your time and energy. How about it? You fire away. Well, you see, for me, that ain't my cup of tea. I ain't doing it. Because when I do things in life, folks, I want to make sure that the benefit is mutual. In other words, I want to make sure that there's a bi-directional flow of benefit. I do something for someone, they get something out of it, I get something out of it. It's great. That's how we ought to be living life. Bi-directional flow of benefit. You see, if I were to start engaging with the political process in a democratic nation where I'm living, you see, if I were to do that, you know what's going to happen? Instead of a bi-directional flow of benefit being established, you know what's going to be established instead? A unidirectional flow of benefit away from me towards someone else. In other words, that's what a scam is. What happens when you get scammed? Is there, in the act of being scammed, or is there a bi-directional flow of benefit? Are you getting something out of being scammed? No! You are getting 100% fucked. And someone else is benefiting from you getting scammed. So there's a unidirectional flow of benefit, not towards you, away from you. And that's how I view democracy. Democracy is a tool that is used to establish unidirectional flows of benefit away from people towards other people. Democracy is used by politicians, public figures, celebrities, and fuck knows who else on the internet in order to take energy, time, and resources away from you and funnel them in a unidirectional manner towards someone else. And that's why, folks, the broad lesson from our mate, President Emerson, is he isn't pretending that there's a democratic process anymore. He's not pretending anymore. So I know what I get. But you see all these other nations in the world that claim to be promoting the democratic process. And even more broadly speaking, you see people in general who are promoting this notion of a democratic process. That tells me something interesting about them. Because they're either one of two kinds of people. They are either a fucking retard. They're just an idiot who is coping and clinging to democracy because they can't bear to face the facts of reality. Okay, I don't want to deal with those people. Too much distortion, too much fucking nonsense going on in the heads of those people. So you've got the people who cope and just cling to democracy like they probably cling to their wives. So you've got those people. Fine, don't want to deal with them. There's a second type of person who promotes democracy. And it's those types of people, institutions or groups, that are trying to establish unidirectional flows of benefit away from you and towards them. They use democracy as a tool of deception to extract time, energy, and attention, as well as resources from you. Because as long as you are being exploited, as long as you are being extracted, and as long as you are distracted by the notion of democracy, you remain in suboptimal circumstances in your life. And you remain in a position of weakness in life. What happens when you're in a position of weakness, folks? You don't really have much independence anymore. That's what happens. When you're in a financial position of weakness, a physical position of weakness, given where you're living in the world, your physical safety, if you're in a financial or physical position of weakness, you don't really have much independence anymore, do you? You are at the mercy of other people. And this is why I say, I'm a selfish git, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud to be selfish. Because you know, by me being selfish, you know what it means? It means I don't put myself in a position of weakness. It means it's far more difficult to exploit me. It's far more difficult to extract from me without my consent. A bidirectional flow of benefit? Is someone extracting from me? Yes, but I'm also extracting from them. And as long as the trade continues to be reasonable and both parties are benefiting in a, quote, reasonably fair way, no problem. I have no problem being extracted as long as I'm extracting from someone else and there's mutual benefit. But fuck me, folks. I don't want to be on the receiving end of a unidirectional flow of benefit that's moving away from me towards someone else. That's called being scammed. That's called being exploited. And that's why I'm selfish, folks. It doesn't mean I'm a cruel person. It doesn't mean I'm a nasty person. It doesn't mean I'm an unpleasant person. I'm a very fair man. A very kind man. But I will always put myself first. And I know, isn't it funny, folks? You see all the people who spout about democracy. It is these people who would, frown upon what it is that I'm saying. Isn't that ironic? It is those people who would say, oh, selfish, you should be looking out for the common good, Mr. Bandido. You should be sharing your resources with everybody else. Distribution of wealth. Yeah, that's a great way to put me into a position of weakness, isn't it? And why would someone want me in a position of weakness? Well, you see, whenever I'm in a position of weakness, I'm no longer a competitor for that person. You see the people who tell you, give your money away. And just, distribute your wealth. You don't need to be a millionaire. No, not at all. Global warming, give it to a global warming fucking charity. Give it to the poor. Yeah. You see the people that try to sell me on that narrative? They're trying to make me less competitive. They're trying to put me into a position of weakness. And they're using a deceptive tool to try and weaken me. This notion of democracy is exactly the same thing. And I ain't going to be deceived by any politician, by any public figure, by any celebrity, by any fucking online influencer that tries to tell me that we need to restore democratic values to the world. My experience tells me that that's a tool of deception. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to get annoyed about politics. I'm not going to waste my time voting. I'm not going to spend hours of my day thinking about how I can try to convince the current schmuck in charge of the country that he ought to see the world my way. No, I ain't doing that. I don't have a problem with politicians. Not at all. Don't misunderstand me. President Emerson of Zimbabwe, he's his own man. He can do whatever he wants to do. Same with all the other presidents and prime ministers and big, rich, wealthy people, government employees, trust fund managers, NGO managers and directors. Everybody can do whatever they want to do. I'm not here to try and tell other people what to do. But you know what I am going to do? I'm going to look after myself. Because a funny thing happens. When I look after myself, the pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place miraculously. You see, when I'm in a position of weakness, in suboptimal circumstances, because I've been deceived, someone has used some sort of a tool of deception, whether it's democracy or some other thing. You see, when I'm in a position of weakness, yeah, am I in a position to help anyone? You see, even if I did want to help someone, can I help them? No. I haven't got my own house in order. And that's the thing. With President Emerson here, I know what he stands for. Great. There are some other places on earth, and I don't exactly know what they stand for. It looks like they are giving me the illusion that they stand for something, but then their actions contradict the words that they are telling me. And it is for this reason, when I factor in what a constitution is, what laws are, what legislation is, how they are enforced, etc., I'm now looking and thinking, all right, me engaging in this world is only ever going to establish a unidirectional flow of benefit away from me. I am only ever going to be exploited in this world, fucked over in this world, thrown onto the bus, get shit thrown in my face. I'm only ever going to be on the receiving end of exploitation. So naturally enough, I am going to shift my time, my energy, my attention, and my resources away from this field, away from this arena, to somewhere else where I can gain benefit, where I can extract in a mutually beneficial way with someone else or with some other group or some other entity. And that's the broad lesson here, folks. Some people are going to bitch, whine and complain about Zimbabwe and this new bill and about how President Emerson is just, he's a terrible person. In fact, you'll probably get some of, the democratic mouthpieces from other nations criticizing Zimbabwe. Isn't that funny, isn't it? You'll have some people who will have the audacity to criticize Zimbabwe. I don't criticize them. Not at all. They're just showing me who they are. And I wish a whole bunch more people, groups, and institutions would do the same thing in this life. Because if I knew exactly what I was looking at, well, wouldn't it be so much easier to come to a conclusive decision, folks? You wouldn't have to do all this speculating and research. You just know what's being presented before you. And because I have evidence throughout my own life history of how democracy is used, as soon as I see someone fucking acting as a mouthpiece for democratic values, I am instantly thinking, is that a person I want to associate with? Do I want to associate with the agenda of this person? Maybe I will. But what happens is, there will be instantaneous, as a first impression, folks, there will be instantaneous suspicion. I'm not saying that that person is condemned, in my view, but I'm definitely suspicious. Because they're either a dipshit, probably, or a malevolent actor trying to deceive me and exploit me. Is there potentially a third category? Are there just some Mother Teresas out there who want democracy and who are going to help me? Maybe they are. I haven't discovered them yet, but that doesn't mean they don't exist.